further ado, here's our first performance, Lambeth Sterling.
About 30 years ago, I figured out my focus on affirmations and my obsessive positive thinking were doing me in. So I started telling the truth, nothing but the truth. I started honing in on family of origin issues. I joined a Harville Hendricks co-ed therapy group for 2 years. They told me I needed to learn to contain myself. They told me I was a pursuer on Harville's scale, that the problem was I would want someone who was not necessarily committed to me. Then I would attach to them and hold on for dear life. This was just a bit too accurate. I was still doing my focusing, which is dropping into the body to check how am I feeling about what is going on in my life. And I was going to meetings in my 12-step programs on relationships, including one for love addiction, usually 9 meetings total per week, and I continued seeing my therapist in a group. Of course. Dr. Hendricks lays out the character types and the related wounding in his book, The Keeping the Love You Find. Early abandonment, I think somebody's unmuted. Early abandonment was repeatedly rearing its ugly head as an issue. Probably won't surprise you to hear that on the Enneagram, I am what they call a 4, type 4, the tragic romantic. 4s were abandoned at an early age, and we tend to be artistic. The pain of early abandonment drives the entire nervous system and the emotions. Oh, yeah, and we tend to be dramatic and difficult. So, what I said to myself, isn't that better than the 3 who's driven by image and success, the 8 who's driven by the need for dominance, or the 2 who's driven by the need to help people just to inflate the ego? And to tell you the truth, most of these seemingly put together Enneagram types are terribly judgmental. Not the 4, we're just desperate and emotionally debilitated. As 4s progress, we move toward becoming a type 1 on the Enneagram, and I now enjoy an obsession with perfection, which may or may not be perfectly obvious to you. I carried an Excel spreadsheet of requirements everywhere I went because I knew when dating, I had no bottom lines or standards without it. See, my mother's temperament was chilly at best. This underestimates the situation by a long shot. And I now knew that I would cling to any sign of human life like an industrial strength vacuum cleaner if I touched said sign of life, somewhat like an octopus, but with less discernment, much less discernment. The moment I met Benjamin was somewhat significant. I don't believe in this sleepless in Seattle stuff. Of course, when I first saw that film, I said, that is the most love-addicted film I have ever seen. Then I saw it 2 more times. One night I was in a hurry to catch a flight, but my co-sponsor in the love addiction program, Margaret, said, "You have to come over. Benjamin's been waiting for 2 hours." So I went. No makeup, unbrushed wet hair, wearing a very large white t-shirt with black velvet leggings. That night when I met Benjamin, I came in the door, I took his hand, I was moving quickly in the other direction. But then I turned at the touch of his hand. Oh. At that moment, I knew there was a sweetness in Benjamin, that he was one of the loveliest human beings I would ever have the privilege of knowing. Let's face it, I didn't know if he was lovely or not. What I know in retrospect was that I wanted more of whatever was in that handshake. I intentionally wore jeans on 2 hikes because I was somewhat ambivalent, and I thought I looked better in leggings with big t-shirts, kind of a stay-at-home, pregnant, gay mom look. He liked my legs in jeans on the trail. He pursued me. I now have a theory that you can tell just about everything about a person in the first 2 hours if you are paying attention. I think one knows most of what one needs to make an informed decision in the first 2 hours of the first 2 dates. By the end of the second date, I knew this new guy I was dating in 1994, about 1 year into my Harville Hendricks therapy group and 3 years into my inner work group, was a 23-year-old stuck in a 43-year-old body, that he liked alcohol a little too much for my taste. He was drinking beer when I arrived at a coffee shop and brought a bottle of wine to see the movie The Flintstones. He was a Tai Chi master. He could get into extraordinary positions at a water fountain. He had a great butt and a PhD from Stanford. I called Margaret, who'd introduced me, and I said, I don't really like this guy. I don't know why you introduced me. Then I got in the car and drove into the city for our third date. Just as we were crossing the street on that date, as I was thinking to myself, now he's describing his alcoholic family system, and he's completely unaware of it. He slipped his arm through my arm. It felt like the arm of a cocker spaniel, and something in me went, oh. I'll tell you, I have never felt anything like that before or since. After our third date, he called and said, well, he didn't say much of anything, and I said, I just can't do this. I can't see anyone who drinks as much alcohol or smokes pot. Then I ignored those bottom lines, which were already on my Excel spreadsheet, which was in my purse. I got into the car and went into town for our fourth date. And he convinced me after that date that the next week he would come over and help me move. And I certainly needed help moving because the only person coming to help was Peter, who also had a PhD. But Peter couldn't do it all himself. So I allowed Benjamin to come too. Probably to Peter's chagrin. I didn't have any money, and I had to budget for little things like $4 shoe polish. I had heard that Marlo Thomas had bought her own china. She wasn't waiting for any wedding. Suddenly it had occurred to me in a meeting that I could buy my own SUV rather than waiting for some guy who looked like Tom Selleck to do it, and I did. Then it suddenly occurred to me in a flash that I didn't need to wait for a man to own my own home. I bought my own condo. The three of us moved everything out of the little cottage behind the big house in San Anselmo. I was in my mid-30s, going from a tiny building with no kitchen, no sink, no water, no toilet. The county had made the owner tear all of that out before I moved in. And I used the rod over the tub to hang my clothes. I had to climb a tall, steep ladder to get into a loft to sleep and pee in a pot. I moved to my own home. The 2 PhDs moved me to my new condo in Vallejo, the Valley of the Hose, as my focusing partner called it. By the way, I found out recently it was right down the street from that guy now known to be the Zodiac Killer. Anyway, I told Benjamin he could sleep in the other room. After all, he had made 2 trips up from the East Bay. 2 in one day. Very kind, very supportive. So he slept in the other bedroom, but he said, "Can I come into your room in the morning?" At 7 a.m., he came trundling in like a 4-year-old in his dark purple, heavy cotton shorts, holding his pillow to his chest. I went to an Al-Anon meeting and said, "Maybe it's okay to smoke a lot of dope if you have a PhD from Stanford." Everyone laughed, but I was serious. Just when my recovery was gaining some traction, I stopped going to meetings on love addiction because I was too busy dating Benjamin. I went to the Al-Anon meetings at lunch in San Francisco's financial district, but I was seldom called upon, maybe because I was going to gay meetings, but it took me a couple years to figure that out. I went to that meeting actually for a few years, and it suddenly began to dawn on me that I was the only straight person in the room. It was close to my work. I learned a lot about being gay without switching teams. After about a year, Benjamin and I went to Hawaii. Before the trip, I had called my friend Judith, who was getting married, and she said, "How long have you been with your boyfriend?" "About a year." "You must read this book called Getting to I Do." Implying that I should be a little paranoid that I was not engaged, I thought. That's kind of sticky, isn't it, Judith? I'm thinking. I mean, she's an MD, a brilliant woman, and here she is sounding kind of sticky, like flypaper. I'm too healthy for that, I thought. But I noticed all I could think about was getting that book. When I got to Hawaii, I was with a friend for 4 days before meeting up with Benjamin, so I got the book. And when I got it, my friend said, "Do not let my boyfriend see that book." I'm thinking, this is not a good title for me to read. Every day, I'm taking it out to the beach. I'm slathering on a lot of 25 and 35 sunblock so I can stay out for hours and read that book, which covers how to get him to propose, what to do if he won't set a date. When I left my friend, I left her a book, Facing Love Addiction, which is what I actually needed to be reading myself. But I figured she needed it more than I did. And if I may say, I hate that book. I have always hated that book. I went to the other island to meet up with Benjamin, and the women there said, "You're under a lot of pressure." And I said, "Yeah, and my gynecologist said he doesn't know how long I've got." And I said to him, "If I start menopause, do I have 2 years from that date to get pregnant?" I read I have 2 years from the start of menopause to get pregnant. And he said, "Oh no, I can't guarantee that. Hurry up, socialize, socialize, hurry up, socialize." These women said, "Take the pressure off. There's a book you must read called Being a Woman." See, these women went to Stanford and schools like that. I knew as independent, brilliant, marvelous women, this book would bring me back to center. I got this new book immediately. This, to be clear, is a second book. The chapter headings are What to Do If He Doesn't Propose Within a Year, How to Get Him to Set a Date. There are 6 of Benjamin's friends watching TV or lying on the beach, and I'm covering the chapter headings. Benjamin said, "I have never seen you read a book with such avid attention." I got this idea that maybe he'd ask me to marry him while we were in Hawaii. I don't know why I thought he might. He had never mentioned the word marriage in my presence. Of course, he didn't ask me. When we were driving home from the airport, he said, "I talked to my friends before we left Hawaii, and they think we're a great couple." "They do?" I said. "What did they say?" "Well, they said they thought we'd be married within a year." I'm thinking, he didn't ask me to marry him in Hawaii. And now he's talking about it in the car on the way home from the airport. What do you think about marriage in general? Well, I'm afraid of marriage. On the other hand, I want to be married. What do you think about marriage in general? Oh no. I don't believe in marriage. And something about the way he turned his head toward the window really bugged me. He not only didn't ask me, now in the car he has just said, "Oh no, I don't believe in marriage." "I'm starting to feel sick," I said. "I feel nauseous. I wish I had known that. I wish I had known that a year ago." I could only hear the negative things he said. I couldn't hear the positive. "Do you think you told me that a year ago, dear?" "I don't think so. I think if you had told me that a year ago, I'd remember it." Of course, I now wish I had not said any of that. Talk about containing yourself. "Well, I could see having a marriage for a family," he said. "But not because you really want to marry me," I said to myself. Not to marry me. I made a performance piece out of the trip to Hawaii, and Benjamin came to each and every one of the performances of this piece, at the end of which I turned myself into a pretzel around a wooden folding chair for the scene in the car in which I imitated him taking long drags on his joints. If I weren't on Zoom, I'd be climbing through a chair right now. I made him into cigarettes. See, pot was illegal, and he would have flipped out. Anyway, he seemed to enjoy it. I would say on stage at the end, the truth is, I don't know if I really believe in marriage. What do they agree to in these ceremonies? To stay until somebody has an affair, until somebody goes bankrupt? To stay around until somebody burns the toast on both sides? I used to stay committed no matter what. It took me years to learn to leave relationships. Furthermore, nobody is going to tell me what to do. And this state of mind does not exactly go along with the state of marriage, of course. I got where I am by thinking that way. So now what I'm thinking about doing with my life is writing a book on how to stay single, with chapter headings. What to do if he proposes? What to do if he tries to set a date? What to do if you propose?
Yay. Yay.
January 15th, 2024, I sign up for a 4-day canoe trip on the Boundary Waters. That amazing 1,090,000 acres of pure, almost uninhabited land between northern Minnesota and the Canadian border. I have visited that area many times since my parents often went there on our summer vacations in my first 18 years. And I've only been on the edges of it, the lakes you can drive to, but I've long thought that I wanted to go deeper into the waters. Sounds like it's going to be more of a spiritual trip than an athletic one, sponsored by the Episcopal House of Prayer in Collegeville, Minnesota. I do hear a voice of criticism saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing? When were you last out in a canoe? And you're too old." And to that voice, I say, I'm remembering what my body worker Carol once told me after I'd spent most of the session kvetching about all the problems and woes in my life. And Carol said, "Nancy, you really have a very good life, Nancy. We just have to put you into it." And now I'm putting myself into it out on the Boundary Waters. It's all fine till May, late May, when the letter comes about the final preparation for the trip. I've not been down there on Big River to get back into a canoe. But it's still a couple months. So yeah, I spent a couple days thinking I could still get out in canoe enough. But then the more I read about the small 2-man tents and the mosquitoes and the list of preparation is long and I'm lazy. Finally, after a couple of days, I sign out of the trip. I don't want to take the risk of making any enemies of these new people that I would meet. Meanwhile, through all these months, I have been watching with horror the unfolding murder and devastation in Gaza. The Israeli and US forces will only admit that it's maybe 40,000 people murdered. Doesn't seem like much to them, but British Lancet is sure that it's at least 186,000 people murdered, many of them, at least a fourth, young children with their limbs blown off. And meanwhile, while all that's going on the surface, the violence in the West Bank is under the radar, but it's escalating. More and more people pushed from their land, shepherds losing their flocks. I'm on a lot of podcast webinars with the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolition, ICAD, and Eyewitness Palestine, hearing these Palestinians tell about the terrors that they are facing every day. They always add, not as bad as Gaza, but it's horrible. Bottles of urine thrown into their yards, and recent settlers, many from the US, breaking into their houses at night and pushing these 1,000-year residents off their farms and lands while Israeli soldiers stand by. ICAD is doing a trip, and August 7th, I sign up for a November trip to the West Bank. We will be witnesses, it says, watching, standing in solidarity with the Palestinians who are facing these daily displacements and violence. I feel about the most exhilarated that I have felt since I signed up for the Boundary Waters, even though I know how completely different it's going to be. Not that 1,000,000+ acres of openness and water and fresh air. It will be barely 1,200 acres of boundary between the Israeli nation and the occupied West Bank, with 2 million some Palestinians living there. But I'm determined to go. I'm excited. Barely a month later, September 7th, American activist Eisner Egi is murdered by Israeli Defense Force. And September 17th and 18th are the pager attacks in Lebanon. Horrendous, not just beyond belief, horrible, but illegal according to international law. Friends call me, meet me, and say, well, you're canceling the trip, right, Nancy? You can't be going. I run into my friend Tansy in the market, and she says, Nancy, I just don't want to read that you've been shot in the head like that young woman. It does give me pause. Of course, I'm feeling nervousness, especially when I learned that my carrier of choice, Delta Airlines, is canceling all flights to the West Bank until late spring 2025. But Lufthansa is still going, and I figure I can take Delta to Frankfurt and then fly to Tel Aviv. October 17th, we have a group Zoom of all the people going on this trip, many of whom are from Europe. I learned that most of them are going to use Wizz Airlines out of Switzerland. I've never heard of it, but decide I better look into it. The leader of the trip is determined, and she says, no matter how bad this gets, this is what activists do, we're going. If there's one plane that isn't El Al, we're going. I get off the Zoom and go back to my packing list and my reading, I'm getting ready. Less than 30 hours later, noon the next day, I get the email that ICAT has canceled the trip because Wizz has canceled their flights. I'm deflated, disappointed. I won't get to meet Rabbi Eric Erishman, who puts his life on the line almost daily, going out into the settlements, trying to protect farmers from losing their flocks. And he's been beaten, put in jail, and he speaks out as often as he can to fellow rabbis saying, Zionism is not Judaism. This is not what the Torah taught us to do. The Torah taught us love and kindness. And I won't meet the Christian minister, Munter Isaac in Bethlehem, who's also trying to speak out to fellow Christians, and many of whom don't even know that there are Palestinian Christians. And he's trying to say to them, we've been here hundreds of years, and all the Palestinians are not Muslims like your churches have taught you to hate. And they're not the Amalekites that you think God told you to smite. And I won't get to see the walled off hotel, all of whose windows face out onto the horrid concrete wall that between Israel and the Palestinian settlers. And I won't get to go to the Aida youth camp and see what they're trying to do to help the youth in that camp that's been there for 75 years and was only to be a temporary camp when it was set up in 1950. I'm disappointed, but I'm worried. How close are we going to get to World War III if Biden and Bibi continue this path? 2 days after the trip is canceled, I wake up to a very cold house. When I go down to the basement to try to reset the heater, it won't start. I call my young friend Gallo, who runs the company that put in my heater some 25 years ago and has maintained it. I'll get there later today, Nancy, and I will take care of it. Don't you worry. I'm going to do the worrying. Sounds good. He does get there at 3 o'clock, and I sit and I listen. The heater comes on for a few minutes, then it goes off for a few minutes. 25 minutes, I'm getting nervous. Finally, it stays on, and Gallo comes up and into the house, and he says, "It's being a little fussy, Nancy, but I'll get it going." Fussy. Sounds like me, Gallo, I say, and the whole world. But the system's old, Gallo. I'm getting worried. I can't afford a new system. I told you to stop worrying. I'll do the worrying, and I will get it going for you. Next day, it's off again. It's been on barely 8 hours. I call, and with his same cheerful voice, he says, "I told you not to worry, and I'll be back this afternoon." This time, it does stay on more than 8 hours, and it's still on Sunday morning, 3 days later, when I'm leaving for Berkeley to go to the Berkeley City Club, that wonderful historic building designed by Julia Morgan at the same time, called the Little Castle, because it was the same time that she was designing Hearst's great big castle. And it's not quite as grand, but it's a beautiful tile pool at the bottom of the Berkeley City Club, just like the one in San Simeon. On the way into Berkeley, I pick up my 28-year-old friend, Amber, who I mentored for 8 years through junior high and high school. And we go to the city club, and we take this fun tour of this historic old building. And then we go out to dinner, and we go to this fun musical at Berkeley Rep. And when I drop her off, we agree that she's going to come to the city club the next day, and we'll go swimming in that pool. We do our laps, and then while we're doing some exercise and talking, I say, "You have no idea, Amber, how happy this is making my old lady heart." And she says to me, "Nancy, I'm tired. I don't like it when I hear you call yourself old. I just hope when I'm your age, I have 1/3 the energy that you do." I say that to friends in their 80s and 90s sometimes. It may be just what we say, but it did make me feel good. I saw another friend while I was there in Berkeley and played Scrabble and had fun. So when I checked out of that hotel, I was the proverbial happy camper. I did a couple errands in Santa Rosa on the way home and got a big Pete's coffee. So when I headed off the freeway onto Highway 128, the windy 2-lane road that takes me home to Mendocino, I was feeling quite joyous. Until about 15 miles east of Mendocino, and I heard this horrible rumbling like a truck revving itself. And there was a truck ahead of me, so I was sure it was he, until he was out of sight and around the bend, and I still heard that sound. I'm no mechanic, but I knew that I had had a blowout. Times I kept driving, but had to push on that accelerator quite hard a couple times, and came into the narrowest part, narrow curves, and kept saying, "You can't stop now. You gotta keep going. I promise I'll do whatever I have to fix you. You just gotta keep going." Finally, we did. A little under an hour, but it felt like it was 20 hours. We got to this wide turnout right at the intersection of 128 and Highway 1. I got through to a very nice woman on 911 and 911, and she said that she'd call the tow truck. She called me back to say that it would be about an hour and a half till it got there, and that she'd try to get a hold of a highway patrolman, though we're in the country, who knows where she'd find one. I keep the car running, so I have the blinker lights and the windshield wipers, and I'm watching the few cars coming by both directions, their tires making swishing loud noises in the rain. I start to feel kind of lonely. None of those are going to notice me or care about me. I call my neighbor Jake and ask him if he'll come down to be with me, just in case that tow truck has to tow my car and I need a ride home. Then I'm watching the cars with a little less loneliness and more interest, and finally Jake's truck pulls in behind me. And he comes up and says, "Well, have you looked at it? You got to get out and look at it." And I said, "No, I'm in denial." But he makes me get out, and he says, I don't know what you must have done. That is in bad shape. I'm surprised you made it that far. That doesn't exactly make me feel better, but we laugh a bit, and finally the tow truck comes and he's able to put on the spare, tiny as it is, and Jake follows me home, and I'm feeling very exhausted but relieved that I made it through that. Asking a bit, okay, what's next? But at least I made it through that. Well, what was next was the horror of November 5th. And I cannot sleep that night. I am in despair. I am scared. I call my friend Rabbi Margaret the next day to ask if we can meet for coffee. Friday we do. Couple sips in, I start in, I say, Margaret, I can't believe it. How can this damn country be so stupid to elect a felon, a maniac who was responsible on January 6th for $1.5 million damage and the death of 5 people? And how many with PTSD they won't get over? And he lied at the debate saying that he tried to send troops, that he tried to help people. This similar thing happened in Brazil, January 8th, 2023, when Bolsonaro was giving the same denial. Oh, he hadn't lost. They stormed their government buildings. But within 5 hours, the new president called out the National Guard, called a national emergency, and had people imprisoned by the nightfall. And to this day, you can't run for dog catcher, let alone president in Brazil, if you had anything to do with that revolt. And he's a 39-count felon. He can't even own a gun in the state of New York, but he's going to be able to put his fat McDonald's greasy finger on the trigger of the nuclear. And Nancy, you're doing it again. You're on a rant that is killing. It's not healthy to you. It's not helping the world. It's not going to help anybody, Nancy. You've got to stop. You're right, Margaret. And I'm so glad that you'll be honest to me. You're saying just what my body worker friend said to me, that my ranting and kvetching takes me out of my life. You're right. I have to build better boundaries between my inner self and all that political craziness that's out there, because I want to put myself inside my own good life.
Yay. Yay.
A woman walks into my booth. My brand new, witchy, tarot, wannabe, occult bookstore pop-up shop, the one I recently started in the middle of Placer County, the business venture my mother does not know about yet because I'm too afraid to come out of the broom closet. Are you a light worker? The woman at the booth asks. It's my first event. The booth to my right is selling charms to customize pens and accessories for kids. My daughter, age 6, buys a red pen customized with Hello Kitty charms and hair clips that she will certainly immediately lose. This morning, my husband and I loaded up our car with a pop-up tent, a folding table that had been in the backyard for over a year, since my kid's 5th birthday, and huge crates of tarot cards, candles, matches, and stickers. Adam and I went back and forth last night on the handheld credit processing terminal I somewhat impulsively purchased from Square a few weeks ago. Can't you just use your phone? I mean, it seems like most of the booths at the farmers markets, they just use their iPhones or one of those little white tap to pay thingies. We could get one at Target before we set up. I don't know, babe. I want to feel legit. And I like that I can print receipts. Will anyone really want to print a receipt, though? I'm just thinking it through. I mean, it's one more thing to charge, one more thing to load in and load out. The credit card machine stayed at home. The car is packed to the gills. There's room for my child in her car seat, but not much else. I realized in a panic last night that I forgot to fill up the tent weights. Tent weights are a big deal in the pop-up community, I'm learning. They keep your tent from flying away at the first strong breeze. It had been raining that night, so getting sand out of the sand pit seemed like a more daunting, earthworm upsetting labor than I was really willing to undertake. So instead, I pulled the large, smooth river stones out of our front yard. They're meant to make a small border next to the driveway. Each stone I remove reveals a deep depression in the dirt. I start thinking about teeth. Roxy's lower central incisors are erupting behind her baby teeth, which she's very happy to demonstrate at the slightest provocation. Do you want to see my shark teeth? They're right here, Hazel! I slip the rock-filled canvas bag into the car. Miraculously, they all fit. What's the name on the reservation? Apothecary Skeptique, I reply, leaning over Adam in the driver's seat. I'm very happy with the name, the Skeptic's Apothecary. As I've healed from the myriad of ways fundamentalism cooked my brain, I'm learning that leaving room for doubt is an essential part of any spiritual practice I may undertake. In my shop, I want there to be room for the curious, the uncertain, even those who are pretty sure it's bullshit. It just happens to be bullshit they enjoy. The check-in person is trying to figure out where exactly they should direct us, where my booth is going to be. She peers at me from below the beanie, clipboard in one hand, walkie-talkie in the other. I'm sorry, the what? Apothecary Skeptique? Oh, you know, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that right. Can I just give her a name? I feel immediately foolish, thinking of my mom's side of the family. How silly I've always thought it is that they use something unnecessary and somewhat inaccurate Spanish whenever they want something to feel fancy or special. Nuestra nueva casa, our new home. She says my name through the walkie-talkie. Then she holds it up to my lips. Apothecary Skeptique? The Skeptic's Apothecary? It could be under Stacy. They finally figure out where we need to go, so we unload and start setting up. I'm struck by how strong Adam is, how excited he seems to be helping me with something new. It takes us a moment to figure out exactly how the tent works. I realize in that moment that this is going to end up being our thing, not my thing, as I had originally envisioned it. I start working on the pricing signage. Stickers, $4 each or 3 for 10. They're vinyl, designed to be waterproof so they can survive long-term placement on water bottles or car windows. Are you a light worker? The woman looks up at me. She has her hands in the pockets of her teal hoodie and a gentle smile. She's rocking back and forth on her feet. And I have no idea how to answer this question. Am I a light worker? Lady, right now I'm just trying to figure out if my stickers are too expensive. The first hour of the event, no one talked to me. No one even looked in my direction. I felt my spirit contracting within my body until I was a shriveled husk of a person trying to attract customers when I'm giving up all the energy of a raisin you find under the couch. But then someone does walk up. They pick up a sticker. They laugh. They put it down. 5 minutes later, someone else picks up a sticker, smiles, but puts it down. Stickers, $3 each or 4 for 10. To my left, there's this booth featuring kitschy kitchen decorations and engraved wood wall hangings and cutting boards. It's almost all of the alcoholic accessories variety, courting the wine moms with wall hangings reading, "It's 5 o'clock somewhere," and a kicky little clock on top. Am I a light worker? Goodness, I'm allergic to hierarchy. I can't define myself. I can't even read books on Goodreads because I'm so afraid of having an opinion. I am not interested in a leadership position, and I am absolutely not an authority. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just a little guy who wants to sell my little cards that I'm not even sure I believe in, depending on where I am in my menstrual cycle on a given day. A goblin who acquires things and wants a bookstore but can't afford the real estate, so once or twice a month, I recruit my husband to do the heavy lifting, and I decorate a little tent in the hopes of creating a space where the queer witches in our extremely red county can feel a little less afraid. But am I a light worker? My face goes hot. I start stammering. I, I, I don't know. It reminded me of the times I would receive a word from the Lord from someone in the evangelical church. People would feel absolutely comfortable and empowered to walk up to a relative stranger, grab their hands, and say, "God put something on my heart for you, sister. I saw a spirit of gluttony when you were eating that spaghetti." Now, it wasn't always judgy put downs disguised as spiritual advice. There was this woman, Rowena or Ramona. She was as witchy as someone could possibly be and still survive within the confines of the evangelical church. I remember long purple hippie dresses and wavy gray hair and glasses, and she had a gift of prophecy. She would prophesy over children in the church, writing out pages on a long yellow legal pad and giving them as gifts to the parents. "Stacy is starlight, for she will shine God's light in dark places." A few years later, when my brother Brian was born, "Brian is a strong oak. He will be planted by the waters of God, and he will not fail." Now, the meaning of the name Brian is actually strong oak, so I'm not sure she gets full credit for that one. But it's so funny. The more time I spend in witchy circles, the more I realize how witchy and occult obsessed my upbringing was. There's a reason that I'm attracted to this stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. They were and are completely terrified of anything that smelled even remotely pagan or new aged. But the parallels between the witchy woo-woo world and evangelical Christianity are too intense to ignore. They have their own version of calling down the corners, where we would stand as a congregation interceding, speaking in tongues, and it would end with the pastor leading us in unison, saying, "We speak to the powers and the principalities in the north," and we say, "North, give up in the name of Jesus." And then we would clap and clap and clap and turn to the east and the south and the west. Like, what's the difference between Reiki and laying hands in prayer? It's just a few inches. I don't think I'm a light worker. I think of myself as more of a librarian. I just like helping people find things. She takes her hands out of her hoodie. She grabs mine across the table. "You have to own it, sister. I can see how happy this makes you. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." Don't be afraid? What is she talking about? I'm an intuitive energy worker. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. My brain started to short circuit, and I started to cry. And it was such a relief because I was so afraid. I didn't know how to be anything but afraid. I'm standing here in a secret booth in the cold, impersonating a sea anemone after it's been poked. I know I need to fix my face. I know my energy is repellent right now. And it's not even that I'm afraid of rejection with the shop. I'm obviously afraid of rejection in this and many other areas. My spooky side was always deeply unsettling to my mother. I started this store in secret. I don't have my picture on any of the social media. My name is not on the business cards because people around here sometimes end up en masse in the homes of people they disagree with. And I'm afraid Moms for Liberty and the Proud Boys are going to show up at our doorstep with loudspeakers or torches. But right now, I'm holding hands with this stranger, this short white woman with bleached blonde hair. She's made me cry. She's come in and she's told me what to feel and what not to feel. On paper, with my history, it should have been invasive. I'd usually be pissed, but God, I needed the energy work just then. It felt like the most supportive thing I'd ever experienced. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. She asked me if I wanted a hug, and I did. She came around the table and we hugged, touching our hearts together. And I felt warm. I felt safe for a moment. Looking back, I keep thinking about how my emotions are programmed to respond to a word from God or the universe or unsolicited energy work at a Dia de los Muertos event in Lincoln, California. You cry and you receive. And it felt so good. It had been so long since I've been able to receive anything in that realm, and it felt so good to let myself believe, if even for just a moment. Now, I still don't really know what a light worker is, and I don't think I am one. But I guess she was. Because I'm not afraid anymore.
Hey, yay. Thank you all very much for being here tonight, and thanks to the performers. Good night.